Imagine a great thinker of the past, Friedrich Nietzsche, awakening today to survey modern times in the West. What would he see? A society led by the foolish. A culture flooded with shallow slogans, groupthink, empty celebrity, and hollow virtue, but lacking true greatness, depth, or vision. A world where stupidity isn't just common, it dominates. But why? What changed over the course? This is exactly what I will discuss through the eyes of the big mustached thinker himself. Why would he hate where we are now? What forces are dragging us into decay? And how do his brutal warnings from over a century ago speak directly to the madness we're watching unfold today? So let's get into it. If Friedrich Nietzsche were to look out at the modern political landscape of the West, one of the first things he'd notice and utterly despise is the dominance of what he called the herd instinct. This was one of his most scathing critiques of mass society. The idea that human beings, instead of striving to rise as individuals, cling to the safety of the crowd. He warned that democracy and modern morality would increasingly train people to think alike, not because it is right, but because it is comfortable. In today's political culture, that warning has fully matured. What we now see across Western societies is a celebration of sameness. Deviation from the social script is punished, not debated. Outrage mobs demand apologies, cancellations, and compliance. The pressure to conform is so strong that people begin to police their own thoughts, just to avoid standing out. Nietzsche anticipated this flattening of thought in his critique of egalitarianism. He mocked the idea that everyone should be equal, not in dignity or rights, but in value, vision, or capacity for greatness. As he put it, everybody is everybody else's equal. To Nietzsche, this wasn't virtue. It was decay. It was a sign that the mediocre were seizing control of the cultural spirit, dragging everything down to their level. At bottom, we are all herd and mob. This is no longer a metaphor. Today, social media algorithms and political discourse reward the herd. What trends becomes truth. What goes viral becomes virtuous. And those who challenge that, who dare to question the popular narrative, are ridiculed or erased. In this climate, Nietzsche would see a society that punishes the exceptional and deifies the ordinary. Truth itself is now dictated by consensus, not discovery, not reason, not courage. Political movements aren't built on conviction or vision, but on slogans and emotional manipulation. Nietzsche would call this intellectual cowardice. He would see that the average citizen is no longer encouraged to rise above, to become what he called the Übermensch, or overmen. This is the tyranny of mediocrity, where greatness is not just ignored, but feared, and where Nietzsche's greatest nightmare is realized, a civilization where the highest is brought low and the lowest defines the standard. And societies like this give birth to the last man, which I am going to discuss now. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche foresaw the arrival of a type of human who would mark the spiritual end of civilization, not through violence or tyranny, but through complacency. He called this being the last man. Lo, I show you the last man. What is love? What is creation? What is longing? What is a star? So asked the last man and blinketh. We have discovered happiness, say the last men, and blink thereby. The last man is not evil. He is comfortable. That is precisely the problem. He has traded greatness for security, vision for contentment, and transcendence for routine. Nietzsche feared this condition more than war, more than chaos. Because once people stop striving for higher things, they no longer need truth, freedom, or even dignity. They will accept anything that preserves their shallow peace. Modern politics has become a theater for these very instincts. Leaders no longer challenge citizens to rise above themselves. Instead, they appeal to comfort, fear, and convenience. The last man does not look to the stars. He mocks those who do. He blinks at creation and longing, thinking these are meaningless pursuits. He no longer asks deep questions. He no longer even understands why one would. And in this, Nietzsche saw the death of the human spirit. Our world, once vast and mysterious, has become small, not because the universe has shrunk, but because the modern soul has. The highest ambition for many is to be left alone, mildly entertained, and shielded from discomfort. To be honest, I have tried to be that last man as well, and maybe I am. To last man, any call to greatness, any suggestion that pain might be necessary for growth is labeled toxic or dangerous. We have discovered happiness, they say, not out of triumph, but to justify their refusal to climb higher. But Nietzsche's criticism doesn't end there. He warned that the last man doesn't just reject ambition, he enforces mediocrity. No shepherd and one herd, everyone wanteth the same, everyone is equal, he who hath other sentiments goeth voluntarily into the madhouse. In other words, everyone must think the same, feel the same, and want the same, or be cast out as crazy. Today, this enforcement doesn't come from a dictator, but from the herd itself. The crowd now disciplines dissent. Those who ask uncomfortable questions are branded extremists, reactionaries, or conspiracists, not because they are wrong, but because they break the illusion of consensus. Free speech isn't suppressed by a tyrant. It's snuffed out by thousands of blinking eyes, all blinking in unison, terrified of what lies beyond their comfortable norms. The crowd doesn't want prophets. It wants providers. It doesn't seek greatness. It seeks anesthesia. And this, Nietzsche would argue, is the true catastrophe of modern times. Not collapse, but spiritual sedation. Not the fall of man, but his quiet surrender. And in this chaos, weakness becomes a virtue, which I am going to discuss now. Friedrich Nietzsche saw it long before we did, a time when power would be demonized, greatness dismissed, and resentment would rise to rule the moral and political order. Those who, unable to rise to greatness, instead seek to bring greatness down to their level. In modern politics, this resentment has been rebranded as social justice, equality, and inclusivity. But Nietzsche would strip away the slogans and see it for what it often becomes, a cult of victimhood obsessed with punishing strength. In such a system, Nietzsche would say, the herd has weaponized morality. Those who dare to break away, the bold, the creative, the self-overcoming, are not honored. They are attacked. Whether it's the entrepreneur, the artist, the whistleblower, or the independent thinker, anyone who stands out becomes a threat to the herd's fragile order. And rather than refuting them with logic, society reaches for a different tool: shame. Nietzsche warned of this inversion. He predicted that a society governed by resentment would eventually turn good into evil and evil into good. The elevation of vulnerability over excellence, emotion over truth, conformity over authenticity, these are not signs of progress in Nietzsche's view. They are symptoms of a society run by the lowest common denominator, where the loudest voice is often not the wisest, but the angriest. We see this vividly in the modern political landscape. Policies and rhetoric are built not around the strong, but around the aggrieved. Those who feel wronged are given power, not to heal, but to control. The cry of justice becomes a tool of revenge. Instead of encouraging personal growth, the culture encourages collective blame. Nietzsche would say this is not morality. It's masked vengeance where dissent becomes taboo. Guilt becomes currency. Everyone must agree, or disappear. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche mocks this very impulse through a powerful moment of irony. When the prophet Zarathustra tries to awaken the people to a higher possibility, the Übermensch, the Overman, the crowd doesn't rise. They shrink, they jeer, and then they cry out, "Make us into these last men, then we will make thee a present of the Superman." In other words, give us comfort, give us sameness, give us safety, and we'll abandon greatness forever. This is the paradox of modern society. We applaud progress, but recoil from challenge. The prophet is mocked, while the herd cheers its own decay. To Nietzsche, this isn't just frustrating, it is fatal. A culture of resentment cannot build anything new. It can only tear down, only level, only equalize downward. It is terrified of hierarchy, allergic to excellence, and deeply hostile to anyone who dares to rise above. What remains is a society where truth is decided by feelings, morality is enforced through outrage, and ambition is treated as a threat. So what's Nietzsche's diagnosis? A civilization infected by resentment is one step away from collapse. Not because it is oppressed, but because it has forgotten how to strive. And one thing that's helping this cause is what I will discuss now. He once said, "We have no organ at all for knowledge, for truth. We know, or believe, or imagine, just as much as may be useful in the interest of the human herd. And perhaps precisely that most fatal piece of stupidity by which we shall one day perish." To Nietzsche, that line wasn't poetic exaggeration. It was a diagnosis. He believed that our so-called facts are rarely about truth. They're about utility. In today's politics, we are living out this prophecy with terrifying precision. Facts are no longer facts. They're tools. They're twisted, curated, spun, and weaponized to serve narratives, not challenge them. Political tribes, news outlets, social media platforms all filter truth through algorithms and ideology. What emerges is not enlightenment, but an illusion of knowledge tailor-made to keep the herd pacified. Nietzsche would see this as a culture-wide self-deception, masked as progress. The love of power is the demon of mankind. That demon, he would argue, now wears a suit and appears on television. It runs our political discourse. It floods our timelines. Politicians no longer speak to convince the wise. They speak to manipulate the masses. Truth is sacrificed daily on the altar of influence, and the herd, desperate for comfort, demands nothing more than confirmation. We live in an era of fact checks, yet the real facts rarely survive the process. Nietzsche would mock this charade. To him, the institutions that claim to arbitrate truth today, whether newsrooms, universities, or government briefings, would be little more than modern-day priesthoods, not guardians of reason. Their goal isn't clarity, it's conformity. Every side, left or right, claims to have the truth. But Nietzsche saw through this binary long before it became fashionable to pick teams. He would say, both sides are playing the same game, the will to power. Both are more concerned with winning the narrative than discovering what's real. And in this desperate battle for dominance, nuance dies. Nowhere is that more obvious than in today's culture wars. Complex issues, moral, biological, economic, are flattened into two shouting slogans. Ideas are judged not by their truth, but by their utility to your side. To Nietzsche, this wouldn't just be annoying, it would be tragic. He dreamed of a culture led by free spirits, individuals willing to suffer for insight, not those parroting the script. But what he would see today is a world drowning in information and starving for wisdom. Nietzsche never believed that truth was easy. He believed truth was painful, lonely, often unbearable. That's why very few people actually want it. They want certainty, applause, safety. But Nietzsche warned, a society that hides from truth to protect its comfort is doomed. We now live in a paradox he foresaw. We have more data than ever before, more access to knowledge than any time in history. And yet our politics are dominated by emotion, by tribalism, and by deliberate ignorance. In this world, Nietzsche would not ask, what's the latest trending fact? He would ask, who benefits from your belief? Because behind every so-called truth today, there's a hand pulling strings, and the herd, as always, is too distracted or too scared to notice. And this death of culture will bring a catastrophe in weak men, the rise of nihilism, which I'm going to discuss now. Forgetting one's purpose is the commonest form of stupidity. The average citizen doesn't hunger for greatness. They scroll, consume, and work jobs that lead nowhere, not toward meaning, not toward the sublime, but toward a numb and shallow peace. This is nihilism, not screaming chaos, but the quiet rot of a civilization that has forgotten its soul. He would look at our schools and media and ask, where is the training for greatness? Where are the calls to become more than you are? Instead, students are taught sheet. Workers are trained for productivity, not for self-overcoming. Art is sanitized. Debate is tamed. Excellence is called elitist. In this world, Nietzsche would not see culture. He would see a corpse, animated by inertia. The man of knowledge must be able not only to love his enemies, but also to hate his friends. That quote isn't about malice. It's about courage. The courage to hold difficult truths, to break with the herd, even if it means walking alone. But the modern West teaches the opposite. Never offend, always agree, fear your enemies, and never disturb your friends. Nietzsche would call this not peace, but cowardice, a kind of moral anesthesia that kills any spark of heroic striving. In his mind, the culture has chosen weakness over will, and that is fatal. He wrote that true culture is created not by bureaucrats, politicians, or committees, but by a few towering individuals, artists, prophets, philosophers, warriors, the ones who suffer for vision, the ones who don't blink when the herd laughs or scorns. But modern Western societies mock these people, or worse, ignore them entirely.